Should you go see The First Omen? Because honestly, I think the answer to that is going to depend, and we're going to talk about all of it. Welcome to Copper Shock, where we are horror obsessed. My name is Tasha Wheelhouse, and today we're going to talk about my review of the 2024 The First Omen. I also wanted to give a huge shout out for you guys. Holy smokes! You guys, we have grown this channel to over 400 subscribers. I am out of my mind, completely blown away. I am so grateful that you are here. I just can't wait to explore more horror stories with you together as we have discussions in the comments. Today we're going to lay out the video a little different. I'm going to put the Copper Shock ratings here at the start to give you some impressions of what I thought about this movie. I read reviews after I saw this in theaters, and the biggest critique that I was coming across was this immediate divide of whether people thought this was a good film or a terrible film. The thriller factor of The First Omen, 1 to 10. I am going to give this a 4. Now here's the thing, I would call this a slow burn film that snowballs into something pretty wild by the end of the movie. You're going to experience this character arc overcoming buildup of what is happening. It's a psychological thriller. There are definitely scenes in this film where I had a really hard time, where I felt myself sweating. My anxiety was that high and I felt that uncomfortable. That was meant to evoke that emotion out of me. It's done masterfully and artistically on purpose, but the people that said it was a terrible film said this is so slow. Which is ironically my critique of the first one. I could understand expecting a horror tension wind-up release and not getting that out of this movie. There are many setups in this film that are quite slow until the payoffs are much, much later, and some of which don't quite pay off for every audience member, and I'll tell you why later in this video. The gore rating. Interestingly, I am gonna give this a 9 out of 10. Even though you don't see a lot of the horror, this is mostly off camera, but they do it with such disturbing imagery to let your imagination go a little wild that I'm pumping up the numbers on this one, because it's not like they're gentle about it either. It's a very visceral film. For disturbing imagery alone, 9 out of 10. Production value. 10 out of 10. These guys delivered for this film, and they did have the budget. They had $30 million to spend on this movie. It's a period film in 1971 where all of the costuming, the hair, the cars around the street were so well thought out and staged. They also had these really interesting long panning shots over the city that remind me of shots like specific cinematography from 1970s. They delivered. This is a good one. The special effects and makeup, 1 to 10. So the scenes were quite impressive as far as gory-filled insanity. For most of those scenes, I will admit, I felt super uncomfortable. I kind of closed my eyes or squelched a bit in my seat because I felt a lot of things during a lot of these scenes. I had a hard time looking at it, which means they probably did their job. So 9 out of 10. There was one shot in particular, one costume that was really well done. Maybe I'll mention it like later down the road. That was basically full body makeup. This storytelling, out of 10, this is a 6. I felt like the plotline answered some very specific questions that I had about the 1976 Omen, but I knocked off a couple of points because while I enjoyed the experience of this film, it's not a story that I'll watch for fun on Halloween. It's not that kind of movie for me personally. And it does carry specific storytelling problems, and that's why it's got some points knocked off and sitting at a 6. I would argue it was a good film. I would also argue it's a tough watch. It's a hard line to walk in entertainment when it comes to horror, to have those primal emotions come out of you and say, is it entertainment or is this just exploitation of something very awful about humanity? I think it bears the question to ask of, who was this film made for? Okay, so here's the thing. They lean pretty heavily into the idea that you already know pretty much what's going on because you've had 50 years to watch The Omen. Let's start with one audience potential demographic, okay? Let's say the general public, the normal moviegoer who just likes to see the latest horror film, but you're not familiar with the original 1976, or you have little to no context for who the major key players were, you're gonna have a hard time with this film. There's some assumptions in the plotline of this film where if you haven't seen The First Omen, you might just drop a couple of things in this one too. Like if you don't understand the name Skiana and how important that is, a very major plotline point handed to Gregory Peck in the original 1976, and a really important piece about this film, this takes place in 1971, 5 years prior. You would probably be like, okay, so why is it important that this young woman who's a novitiate, she is about to take her vows to become a fully fledged nun, and she's volunteering her time at this orphanage in Rome after having moved there from America. I lost the thread a little bit here, but if you are just a normal moviegoer and you haven't really explored much about the Omen universe, this might just be a movie that you rent. It's hard because I feel like they do explain some things, but the intrigue for me was higher. If you are a major diehard fan of the 1976 The Omen, I think you're genuinely gonna like this movie because it does set up and pay off and answer very specific questions of holes that I found about the original Omen, which leads me into my next part, which is, does this film honor the original 1976 The Omen? I think it does. It's got some really cool nuances that I pick up on in the film. Some of them are slightly on the nose, but they use it in a very clever way. For example, they show this in the trailer, so I don't feel too bad talking about this scene. There's a nun who lights herself on fire and hangs herself in front of a party of children. That classic Omen scene. But I really enjoyed the fact that they did answer some questions I definitely had about the Omen. In fact, I have a whole video like this where I'm like, there's some things in here that just don't make sense. Why is it just the nanny taking care of Devil Boy Damien? Isn't there literally a network of people that would want to see this come up? We now have a whole plot line where you could go buy a ticket to get the answer to that, because that's what this entire movie is about. The name Skiana, it was almost a throwaway name in the original 1976 of find the gravestone with this name, for reasons, because it was the mom. She was just some woman that had a baby and died in the 1976 film. But here, it has a full exploration around this lineage of this mother in particular and what their important role is in order to bring about this apocalyptic start. It's interesting. Final thoughts for me, I will admit there were some tough scenes to get through to watch that, again, artistically were to evoke those emotions, not just disgust, but anxiety. It's violent. Even if it's not expressly gory immediately on the screen, it's got a lot of disturbing imagery in there for you, so just be prepared for that. I appreciate that I did experience this film. It is a film that made me think. It is a film that had gorgeous shots that just put a smile on my face. There's one shot in particular where she is praying because she has night terrors and she doesn't even trust her own mind. After having one of these night terrors, she's praying at this altar of these candles and the camera pulls back. The bottom candles come up with its fire, and the way that the top candles of the top crescent are wax bleeding down, and it pulls away from her sitting in the middle of this. And then two lanterns for eyes put off to the side, and this wide shot of her slowly being consumed in this mouth was a gorgeous shot. That was a good, masterful shot to me. And in the meantime, I am so glad that you joined me today. Please subscribe if you like this video, and yes, I have a theory based off of this film that Gregory Peck's son is still alive. Yeah, like the baby he thought was dead, I think it's still around. But I will tell you about that in my research week next week. I hope to see you there. Bye.